Today's story is tragic and gruesome. As such, viewer discretion is advised. Before we get into this video, I'm going to ask you to hit that thumbs up button and lightly knock the subscribe button so you don't miss more Oregon adventures and stories just like this one. Labor Day weekend 1974, Richard and Belinda Cowden took their two children, David, age 5, and Melissa, age 5 months, on an impromptu camping trip near the Carberry Creek Campground near Copper, Oregon. They had planned to return to Belinda's mother's house on September 1st to have dinner with them before heading home. Belinda's mother only lived a mile or so away from the campground. On September 1st, in the early evening hours when they didn't show up, Belinda's mother got kind of worried, so she jumped in her car, drove out to the campground, and went looking to see if she could find it. When she got to the campground, the first thing she saw was Richard's truck. It was sitting on the side of the road near the campsite. She parked next to it, got out, walked to the campsite, and the only thing she found there was a tent that was still set up. On the picnic table was Belinda's purse, a diaper bag, a camp stove that was still set up, and a half bottle of milk. On the ground in front of the tent, kind of in the center of the campsite, was Richard's keys and his wallet. Belinda's mother got kind of worried, so she notified the police. Police came out, took a look around, and said, yes, this is a very creepy scene because we have all this stuff set up, but nobody's here. They asked around every other camper, nobody really seen them, nobody really knew what went on, and that's generally the search that police did on September the 1st when they were first reported missing. The following day, on September 2nd at around 9 a.m., the family dog Droopy, a basset hound, was found scratching at the door of the Copper General Store. Now, he had gone camping with his family, but for some reason he had left the campsite and was now at the Copper General Store 24 hours later. At that point, police did launch a massive search for the Cowden family. They've been gone more than 24 hours at this point, so they started a big search. Those involved were local police, state troopers, state police, Oregon Army National Guard, and several other volunteer organizations. They searched far and wide, they couldn't find anything, and eventually after a couple of weeks, the search was called off because they just didn't find any sign that the Cowdens were anywhere. Police did formulate a theory that the Cowden family had gone missing along with the 8 other people who had gone missing in Oregon and Washington over the previous year. However, those 8 people who had gone missing would later be attributed to one of the most famous serial killers in the United States, Ted Bundy. At the time of the Cowden disappearance, Ted Bundy was living in Utah. He had moved to Utah a couple of days before, so clearly he had no involvement in the Cowden family disappearance. 7 months after the Cowden family disappearance, in April of 1975, 2 hikers moving across a trail looked off into the trees and saw somebody tied to a tree. They notified police. Police came out and the body was identified as Richard Cowden. He had been tied to a tree. Police began searching the area, and in a cave they found that had been walled up with rocks, they found inside the body of Belinda, David, and Melissa. Belinda had been shot in the head with a .22 caliber gun along with David. Based on the evidence at the scene the Cowdens were found and at the campsite they were at, police formulated the following theory. Before I get into that theory, I'm going to tell you that in the description of this video, everything is organized by chapters. You will see one chapter that is called Viewer Discretion. If you do not wish to hear the gruesome tale of how the Cowden family died, or the theory of how the Cowden family died, then I encourage you to click the next one where I talk about the suspect involved. Alright, so the police came up with the following theory of the Cowden family. On the morning of September 1st, 1974, Richard Cowden and his son David left the campsite. They walked to the Copper General Store, which is again about a half a mile away from their campsite. Walked in, they purchased a carton of milk. And then they left. They went back to their campsite on foot. They didn't have his truck with them. They walked back to the campsite. Somewhere between 10:30 and noon is what police theorize. Somebody or some people walked into their campsite, took the Cowdens from their campsite in a different vehicle, left, went about 7 miles away, tied Richard Cowden to a tree, sexually assaulted Belinda, and then shot her in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. They then turned their sights on David. They fired 1 shot into his head, killing him instantly. And then 5-month-old Melissa was sexually assaulted, and then she was stomped until she died. This is one of the most horrible things I've ever said in my life. In 1964, a woman by the name of Ola Phipps, who was 16 years old, was out riding her horse near Springfield, Oregon. When she didn't return home that night, her parents went and looked, and then eventually the next day, more people went and looked. They did find her horse feeding in a field near a wooded area. They searched the wooded area, and in that wooded area they found the body of Ola Phipps. She had been sexually assaulted and her throat had been cut. She was deceased. It didn't take long for police to get a suspect in this case, and the suspect they got was a 13-year-old boy by the name of Dwain Little. Dwain Little was charged with the crime, he was convicted of the crime, and in 1966 he began a life sentence at Oregon State Penitentiary. However, his life sentence did allow him to parole, and on May of 1974, so 3 months before the Cowden family went disappearing, Dwain Little was paroled. Labor Day weekend of 1974, Dwain Little, along with his family, went to the Copper area and the Carberry Creek to camp out for the weekend. They signed a logbook stating that they were there, and witnesses even saw and were able to identify his truck. However, at the time, nobody really thought anything of it. Going forward to January of 1975, Dwain Little's girlfriend called his parole officer and said, hey, Dwain has a .22 caliber gun. This is the same caliber gun that was used against Belinda and David. Dwain Little's parole was revoked and he was sent back to prison, at which time, a few months later, he tells his cellmate that he was the one responsible for the Cowden family murder. This was right after the Cowden family murder had been found, and it was big news, so he had seen it while he was in prison. Police investigated him, he denied it. They investigated his family, they denied it. The gun that Dwain Little was said to have had prior to him being rearrested and his parole being revoked was never recovered, so a ballistics analysis wasn't ever done. The police had nothing on him except for circumstantial evidence. They had him at the crime scene and they believe he had the same gun. He had witness statements saying he was there, but they really didn't have anything concrete on him. So in 1977, Dwain Little was paroled again. In January of 1980, Dwain Little kidnapped a woman by the name of Margie Hunter. He beat her, he raped her, and then he left her for dead. However, she would survive. Margie was pregnant at the time, and her baby would also survive. Dwain Little was rearrested, thrown in prison, and this time, because of his new assault, given 3 life sentences. Dwain Little is eligible for parole in 2040. He will be about 90 years old. Generally believed that Dwain Little was responsible for the death of the Cowden family. In some degrees, it does match what he had done previously and what he had done since. The Cowden family murder is a mystery to this day and will remain such until physical evidence is found and Dwain Little or whoever else is charged in this murder. Okay guys, thanks for joining me on this one. This has been a very, very sad and depressing story. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for sticking with me. I will see you next time for a much more lighthearted story. Catch you later.